Imagine this. It's 1857, and the United States is basically a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And that spark, well, it didn't come from a politician or a general. Nope. It came from an enslaved man named Dred Scott. His personal fight for freedom was about to set off a legal explosion in the Supreme Court that poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning out of control. So, how on earth could one man's lawsuit do that? I mean, really push an entire nation to the brink of war? That's the huge question we're diving into here. You see, Dred Scott's case was never just some dry legal battle. It was a personal quest for justice that crashed head-on into history and changed its course forever. All right, so to really grasp the massive impact of this case, we have to start with the man himself. This is Dred Scott's journey. One man taking on an entire nation that was already about to collapse. Okay, so let's get right to it. Who was Dred Scott? Who was the person at the center of the case that would literally tear America apart? Dred Scott was an enslaved African-American man, born way back around 1799. He lived in Missouri, which was a slave state. But here's where his life took a massive turn. His owner took him to live in Illinois and what was then the Wisconsin Territory. And this is the absolute key to his entire story. In both of those places, slavery was completely illegal. And that one simple fact became the bedrock of his hope. See, at the time, there was this legal idea making the rounds called once free, always free. The concept was pretty straightforward. If an enslaved person lived on free soil, they could legally claim their freedom, even if they were later taken back to a slave state. And this was the argument Dred Scott was about to hang his entire life on. So when he returned to Missouri, Dred Scott made a choice. He decided to fight, not with guns, but with the law, and so began a legal battle for his freedom that would last for over a decade. The year was 1846. That's when Dred Scott, along with his wife Harriet, first walked into a Missouri court and sued for their freedom. This was the official start of a journey that would wind its way all the way up through the American legal system. Scott's argument was just incredibly straightforward. You could break it down into 3 simple steps. 1, I lived in free territories. 2, slavery was against the law there. 3, therefore, my family and I should be free. It makes perfect sense, right? And believe it or not, at first, he actually won. A lower court in Missouri agreed with him. You can just imagine that glimmer of hope. But that victory, it didn't last long. The decision was appealed, then it was overturned, and his case started its long, slow climb to the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. So after all those years and all those legal fights, the case finally reached its last stop. The fate of Dred Scott, and really the fate of the nation, was now in the hands of 9 Supreme Court justices. And in 1857, the verdict finally came down. And the decision in Dred Scott v. Sanford sent shockwaves across the entire country that went far beyond the walls of any courtroom. The ruling was a complete and total disaster for Scott. The court didn't just rule on his freedom, it made 3 gigantic declarations. First, they said Dred Scott wasn't a citizen, so he had no right to even sue in federal court. Second, and this is just wild, they said no person of African descent, free or enslaved, could ever be a U.S. citizen. And third, they decided Congress had no power at all to ban slavery in any U.S. territory. That third point, that was the political bombshell. It basically took the Missouri Compromise of 1820, a delicate political deal that had kept a fragile peace for decades, and just threw it right out the window. The Supreme Court had just obliterated one of the very last pillars of political compromise that was holding the country together. The reaction was immediate. It was explosive. The decision didn't settle the slavery debate. It just deepened the massive canyon that was already splitting the North and the South. And just like that, the country split in 2. In the North, people were just outraged. They saw it as a pro-slavery court hijacking the government. But in the South, the ruling was celebrated. I mean, it was seen as this huge victory that confirmed the rights of slave owners and opened the door for slavery to expand. With this one ruling, any chance for a middle ground just disappeared. The Supreme Court had basically declared there was no more room for negotiation. Any shot at a peaceful political solution to slavery was now pretty much impossible. The nation was on a collision course. So why do we still talk about this case today? What makes it so important? Well, because its legacy is woven directly into the fabric of American history.
It draws a straight line from one man's fight to a nation's war. And the path from this decision to war was terrifyingly short. The ruling comes down in 1857, pouring fuel on the fire. Just 4 years later, the Civil War begins. And the core issues of the Dred Scott case, slavery and citizenship, they were finally settled on the battlefield. That led directly to the 13th and 14th Amendments, which abolished slavery and granted citizenship, completely overturning the court's horrific decision.
And here is the ultimate tragedy and irony of it all. Dred Scott never actually won his own freedom in court. He and his family were freed by a former owner a few months after the verdict. But his fight, his decade-long struggle for justice, had an impact he could never have possibly imagined. It became a catalyst that pushed the country into a war that would finally end the institution of slavery for good.
And that just leaves us with this final thought. The story of Dred Scott is this powerful, incredible reminder of how the fight of a single person, armed with nothing more than a belief in their own rights, can challenge a nation and completely reshape its destiny.